Thank you so much, Farhan. Doing very well.
Yeah, so I think we'll get started by having you share a little bit more about your story with our audience. I, for one, was drawn to your work years ago at this point, primarily because of how international your background is and how all the different experiences that have shaped who you are today are really unique.
You're too kind. So I remember it was 4 years ago. It's amazing that you joined the Gulistan class. Maybe you joined an earlier one, but that's when we spoke to each other. We got to know each other through the class and we messaged and all that. But yeah, I think it's just been an accident of birth that I was born in the United States, but with two diverse. So my mother is Turkic. She's from a Turkish speaking minority in Iran, and my dad's Persian. So there's that. And then I was born in an immigrant household. So from birth, I was basically put in this position of being a medium between two cultures, a medium of transfer. My grandparents, for example, who helped raise me, they didn't know English at all. They hardly knew any of it. So I had to basically, since I was as early as I can remember, I was translating the TV and reading the newspaper for them and working. So it was kind of like I was made for this role, so to speak.
So you've always found yourself at the intersection of multiple languages, multiple cultures. What inspired you to take on language, specifically the Persian language, as your calling when it comes to your career?
So I was improving my Persian slowly because when you were raised in the diaspora, you're fluent, but to the extent that it's relevant. So you're not learning poetry or learning how to write speech, you're conversing. So you're always limited to that conversational level. And then I went to actually study a year of high school in Iran. I lived with my grandparents. They moved back and I missed them. So I went and spent some time with them. I figured, when I'm an adult, I can't do this. So I went and lived there and I went to school, but I always had this feeling that I really owed it to them and my heritage to get good at Persian and know how to read and write. And then just by being immersed, I saw how amazing the poetry was. And if I had to say one thing, it was the poetry, because I knew how to communicate with my parents and grandparents and family already. But what pushed me to become an expert now in Persian, if I could say so, was how I fell in love with the poetry. And that there's a bit of randomness in that. Maybe I just wouldn't have liked it at all. But something about the poetry just stuck to me. And now it's my life, essentially. So I think it's really that.
I would love to hear a little bit more about that, Muhammad Ali, in terms of what about Persian poetry, in my eyes, as somebody who has interacted with Persian poetry to some degree, I think it's the universal message that many of the Persian poets of centuries ago really imparted to their audiences. There's a very human element to the work. It has transcended time, culture, language, and many other divisions that we see today in our modern world. But what was it specifically, if you don't mind me asking, about Persian poetry that really influenced you to make this your calling?
The first poet that I saw and came across in a serious way was Omar Khayyam, who those of you who've read him know that his poems are very short and approachable compared to other poets who write much longer. And Khayyam, what I liked is he expressed a kind of carpe diem, seize life at the moment. Who knows what's really going on? At the perfect age, because I was 16, I was questioning everything. I was wondering, is Islam right about everything, or is the secular modern world right? Because it's a zero sum competition in a way. And Khayyam did a really good job of taking kind of the angsty, bothered version of being nihilistic and make it not only beautiful, but have a positive twist to it. So, okay, if life is meaningless, which I was very much convinced by at the time, then at least just enjoy it for what it is. And it really connected with me. So I read his whole book several times with my grandma helping me. And then once I did that, I thought, okay, I want more. I just went to a bookstore and I said, what's a book that's similar to this? And that just started the process.
That's amazing. It was really, I think, the curiosity and that initial exposure to a very famous poet who, at that time in your life, you were looking for answers. And this particular poet and his work, which again, I think is very transcendental, it kind of was the spark that ignited for you and that took you to where you are today. So our journey starts much later, as you mentioned, about 4 years ago, when I joined one of your classes and I was interested in becoming a part of your community. And I would love for you to share a bit more about how you have, over the past few years, really built an international presence, a community of enthusiasts, students, writers, philosophers passionate about this topic that really is so close to home for you.
Sure. So I started the page Persian Poetics, and then I started to take students privately during COVID. People would message me and say, "Hey, can you teach me?" And I thought, well, it's COVID. I don't have much to do. I'm a student. Sure. And eventually the page started to grow and it went viral with the Rumi was Muslim campaign, which anyone who goes on my Twitter page can just see it's the pinned tweet. But that essentially triggered a group of people who wanted classes, and people were approaching me saying, well, teach us what's the real Rumi if it's mistranslated. So I started hosting one class and two classes. And then you were pivotal in this. You came along, and at the time, I didn't really have a proper website. It was just Google Forms and Google Pages. I understand what you felt when you saw that the way to sign up for my class was to pay me on Venmo and then send a screenshot of the payment to me in a WhatsApp. And then I would manually save your number and add you to a WhatsApp group. And that just felt very normal to me. And after I think one or two classes, you reached out and you said, there's a better way to do this, right? There's an entire infrastructure it's oriented towards these types of things. You don't have to be WhatsApping 100 people every day. And you helped me build the website out. So nothing about the work that I do has changed from then to now. The difference is building the website that you helped me build put me into the mindset of, oh, I'm not just doing this for fun, but okay, this is what marketing is. This is what people want, and this is how I can address it so that people are getting what they want. And this is customer service and how to manage. Because at the time, I didn't have the infrastructure to do any. I mean, I remember the first year I had to do taxes. I hired an accountant from a friend, and he just looked at the paperwork and said, "This is ridiculous." I gave him screenshots of my Venmo. He's like, "You can't just do that. You need an Excel. You need accounting." And he said, "Isn't like a back end on your website or something?" So now, there's a back end and it's professional. And this kind of shaped my mind to where I thought, okay, it put me in a mindset of growing it to where it is now, to where I'm advertising classes. Later tonight, literally, I'm going to go perform live here in New York. So it's kind of brought me to like a new level, let's say, maybe from a hobby to now. I mean, now I say, hey, look, I have a published book. I'm performing in New York. I have all these students. I have 400,000 followers. We'll say, okay, it's a real job now.
That's incredible. And it's really humbling to have been a part of that journey. The fact that you've been able to take what you are so good at and your passion and translate that into a career and really grow it and scale it is exciting for me as somebody who is involved and is always fascinated to see how solopreneurs, in your case, are dedicating themselves to doing what they really enjoy doing and sharing that with the rest of the world. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and I think it ties back to community to a certain extent, is I've been a part of your community. I've seen some of the messages that students are pinging you about. When you discuss poetry, when you discuss topics that are rooted in the humanities, that are sometimes esoteric and may not translate well to somebody who you've just met or somebody that hasn't interacted with you for that long, how do you, as a teacher and as a student of the Persian language, how do you translate complex ideas, themes, or topics for such a global audience? What are some of the strategies that you found really
There's
helpful?
a really good quote in the Masnavi Rumi. So Rumi mostly writes in Persian. I think 98% of his work is in Persian. Some of it's in Arabic, but he has this beautiful Arabic line where he says, "Kallamu an-nas ala qadr uqulihim." Speak to people according to their level of understanding. So I just meet people where they're at. You're from a culture that has it, but you don't know Persian. Okay, we'll focus on the language and then you understand the Sufism more. The opposite could be true. Someone could know Persian but come from a secular background. I'm interested in the Sufism. So it depends on where the people are at, where the class is at, and you just adjust for them. And that's the biggest struggle with that is not what I just described, but having these pages. So when I produce content for the wider audience, that's always a struggle, right? Sometimes I make, for example, I just posted my most recent post was 2 minutes of me reciting a Rumi poem. Now I knew it wasn't going to do well. Sometimes when you post a reel, it won't do well because it's so 2 minutes of me reciting in Farsi and in English, and not everyone's going to get every metaphor, and it's long, and 2 minutes people might just see the time and just scroll by. But I sometimes you just know, and this is kind of the negative thing about the platform and having this algorithm based approach is that some stuff that you need to put out there will not reach as many people. So it's always about finding a balance, and I'm not sure if I've fully struck it yet. But I try to mix and match, and especially even in group classes. So in private classes, like I said, it's easy. But every week we read Hafiz and Rumi as a group, and some people grew up in Iran and they're just there to connect with Persian because they live abroad and they miss it. And other people don't know Persian at all. They're just learning and they're just picking up a translation, and they're not no Muslim, no Iranian, no Persian, no regional background like a British or Canadian person of European background. So it's always been a struggle to try to keep everyone moving along and happy and learning.
I'm sure, as your community evolves and as you continue to scale your services, some of those challenges may present really interesting opportunities to be able to chip away at using some emerging technologies, using tools that honestly I would be excited to kind of tinker with, that we hear a lot about in the wider world. And actually, some of our podcast guests are spearheading those types of solutions in their communities. One of the things that, as somebody who's super passionate about building and sustaining communities of learning, again, that's the theme of this podcast. What have you learned, if you could reflect on the last few years, maybe even before you had the platform you have now? What are some of the key things that you learned about building community, about sustaining interest, and cultivating that passion and that vision that you share with the people that are in your community?
I think everyone has something that someone else wants to learn. It's hard, I hardly can think of a human being on earth who I could say nothing that you know about anything is of interest to me, right? Obviously, everywhere, someone, even if I'm on the street and someone can just tell me the history of that corner, what buildings were here, who walked by, even that. The issue is conveying it in a way that interests someone or presenting it in the right way. I came across this because I didn't understand marketing and advertising and presentation, where I'd have the same class, the Rumi Reading Circle, and it had two members in it. And I just tinkered a few things, and now it has 12 or 15 people who come every week consistently and read. And it was just a matter of making the title more accessible, or making the advertising look easier to read, or just explaining what it was in a sentence instead of a paragraph, or just making a few small adjustments like having a translation along with the Persian to read. So instead of just my translation, there's a translation that an English speaker can read. They can, because when you join a class, it's not enough to just say, oh, you can join if you know English, but there's just Persian on the screen. And I'll say, oh, it's fine. I'll speak to you in English. When they join the class, they see there's English on the screen. So just a few small things really can be the difference between a very niche, small group of people who are hyper dedicated, who would come no matter what, and attracting a bigger group of people who maybe they need to feel like, maybe I should come, right? So like that hole in the wall restaurant, maybe if it just looked a little nicer and had a bit better advertising, then all of a sudden it could be a chain. And I think that's where I was. I was kind of in that hole in the wall status. I had the great food, I had the great content, but just the presentation was awful. I wish I knew what I knew now when COVID started. I could have really done a better job of using that kind of appetite people had for online. It's a completely different phase because we have to convince people, hey, we know you're tired of it. We know you want to go in person now to do everything, but this one thing is worth doing online. So now we're in a completely different ball game where I have to convince someone, hey, on your Saturday, I know you really want to go out at noon, but how about at 12 to 1 we sit and learn Rumi together? So our approach has to be completely different. I'm even still getting a hold of that.
And I think the tweaks, like you mentioned, the small tweaks, this is something that I'm discovering as a part of this podcast, as a part of what I do, is really about to try to connect it back to one of the things you said at the very beginning, reach the learner where they are, right? I've mentioned this on multiple occasions in conversations with others. You have to be accessible. The information that you share, the messaging, the language, the experience, if you will, really has to be accessible. It needs to resonate with as large a group of people in your target audience as possible, because again, that's going to be what's going to translate into interest and then signups and then more value creation for the community as a whole. One of the things that when I think about the work that you do as a student of Persian poetry myself, when you think about this body of knowledge that has been around for centuries and that continues to inspire so many people today, what are some of the challenges, if you will? This can be a bit more macro in preserving the authenticity of that original text, right? Again, I think one of the inflection points in your career was the Rumi was Muslim hashtag, like you mentioned, right? You want to preserve the authenticity of the original works, but also make it relatable to modern readers. So, any strategies or takeaways that, as you reflect, what has allowed you to transcend some of those timeless principles into 21st century, digitally distracted, hyper connected people today?
Yeah, this is the biggest struggle I faced. I think more than all the other ones is trying to convey medieval poetry from a different culture and time. I mean, even think a contemporary Persian person is still living in a vastly different world than what Rumi was living and talking about. So, let alone someone in the United States today, no language background, no cultural background, no time zone, no time period in common. Literally nothing could be in common. Rumi really couldn't be more different than a person walking around, out here in New York today. So I really faced this challenge. And what I've done is essentially I've tried to take the best snippet that is most universal and then use that to reel in the people who are interested in the particular. So that way, it's like a sample. When you walk by these Yemeni coffee shops, you must know. I think the listeners know now. If you're in the United States, Yemeni coffee shops are in every American city now. And just like 5 years ago, there wasn't a single one anywhere at all. Right, Tahoe House. We say Parcham Balas in Persian, though the flag of Dearborn. I'm from Michigan originally. Dearborn's flag is up. We founded this thing. Tahoe House came in. But I remember in New York, I was walking by, very academic, not the type of people to know about niche, Yemeni coffee. And the guy was handing out cups, and I thought, this is great. People walk by, someone will drink it and think, oh, this is not normal coffee, and they'll go. And they got something, and someone who loves it will become a patron. And that's the way I view my page. Is maybe some people will come and they won't be interested, and other people will come and they'll only just follow the page. They're only interested at that accessible level. But the goal is to attract those people who say, "Oh, wow, that little cup was great. Where can I get a full one?" And then with, they say 1 or 2% of people become customers or whatever. So if I have a few 100,000 followers, that hopefully at some point you'll accumulate a certain percent who really want to learn, who really want to come to join a Masnavi class and actually spend time getting to know Rumi at a deep level. So that's really been my goal, because I couldn't do what I criticized, right? I criticized people for changing Rumi too much in translation. My idea was, well, no one's going to buy Rumi if he's so particular. So why don't we just make it so watered down that anyone can get it, right? I'm not trying to do that. What I do is I look at the original and I just pick out literally like the half of a percent, because Rumi has, I think, 65,000 some lines of poetry. So you just look for that little tiny percent that isn't particular in any specific way. And you say, hey, look, there's this. And if you want, you can come and get, in the nitty gritty. So that's been my kind of approach with respect to Rumi.
Yeah, and I think in terms of some of the other great work that you've done, that I've really showcasing some of the other great contributions of Persian poetry to your audience. I mean, I remember the Poetess course, which focused on female poets from the 13th century onwards, which is incredible because, again, that's a time in history in which most, even folks that are from the region, they may not be aware of all the great contributions that this particular demographic, female poets, contributed to the body of literature that we have today. And I also want to just mention to our viewers that one of the things that I think is so uplifting and transcendental about your work is because the Persian language historically has been the language of culture for a large swath of the Middle East and South Asia. The work that you've done in showcasing the Persian language in South Asia in particular, I think has been received very well because there is a lot of interest in folks from that part of the world to reconnect with their cultural heritage for various reasons, historical and otherwise. Some of that has been lost. So I think it's a great exercise in revitalization that you're spearheading as well. So I'm curious to know, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Maybe are there other future areas that you're really looking into in terms of building new content for your community?
For sure, yeah, you're too kind, but that really is one of my goals, is to revitalize these traditions that are withering away. I mean, even in Iran, let's say the main country people associate with Persian and reading these poets, really only a couple poets are well known. I mean, there's huge swaths of Iranian poets that are just unread. And then on top of that, like you said, in South Asia and in Central Asia, you have traditions that are just there's no state support, not really much institutional support to speak of in terms of looking at these things. So the goal really has, and that takes two things, because I like to look at these understudied, under accessed works, but it also hit my community because I have a large percentage of, I think like a quarter or something of my followers are, it's hard to get demographic data from Instagram, but just judging based on city locations, are South Asian. So, if I want to cover female poets, and because I'm interested and I want to cover South Asian poets, and I cover a female South Asian poet, and all of a sudden a bunch of members of my audience on one side are happy, on the other side a bunch are happy, then great, then everyone's happy and I get to have fun and dig through manuscripts. So I do really look for opportunities like that. I'm always looking, and at this point I've done classes on Hafez and Saadi and Rumi. I mean, I have a weekly reading class with Rumi, but in terms of designing a course that's a semester length, at this point our webinars that I've been testing recently, I've just basically decided to focus on poets that are understudied or underread, not so known. Because I think, if you want to learn Hafiz and Saadi, there's endless materials. As few as they are, there are still relatively enough of them. Whereas people like Mirza Ghalib, I don't think there's any English language class, and I'm planning, for example, him in the future. So it's also about, not only giving your audience what they want already, but trying to judge what they would want, but they don't know they want. If they knew it existed, they'd want it. That's kind of that's where I've seen real kind of success with classes, is where I give them something where they didn't even know that they wanted it. But when they knew that it was available, all of a sudden, like, oh, of course I want this. I don't think anyone sat and thought, wow, Mahfi, let's like this female Mughal poet. Why doesn't she have a class? I never saw someone type that on Twitter or something. But when I made it, all of a sudden, tons of people were interested, which was such a great feeling to know that something I thought of and was doing was, giving people something they'd wanted.
Absolutely. You are now, you have become a contributor to this body of knowledge. So tell us more about the book that you just published.
You're too kind. I always forget to mention it. So the book is a translation of Rumi poems. I thought it would only be appropriate because I entered this scene by talking about Rumi's mistranslation. So before I did other poets, I figured, okay, I have to do Rumi, even though I just said he's been covered extensively. In any case, it's covering 100 of the quatrains, the rubais we say in Persian, the lesser known poems. I picked the rubais because they've never really been given good attention at all. Only Rumi's Masnavi has been translated, which is a different work. But in any case, I picked his least translated body of poems, and I selected 100 poems that I thought, kind of actually going back to what I said earlier, could have, not to every single person, because ultimately when you have enough Rumi poems, there's going to be some very particular references and things about life in contemporary Turkey or Islam or being a medieval person, but they're digestible enough. I only picked poems that wouldn't require more than a few sentences to explain a footnote. What's a mihrab in a mosque? It's like our pulpit. Basically, I picked kind of ones that are basically digestible, and I want it to be a book to reach the people who I'm always telling them, oh, by the way, the Rumi books you have aren't authentic, right? So I became popular because of Rumi was Muslim, and people would say, well, what's authentic if the translations that are commonly known are inauthentic? And I would say, oh, it's this huge, thick book full of footnotes that's right here, academic and full of Latin phrases and references to literature and this and that. And people are like, okay, boring. So I basically created the book that I would hope would be the answer that, look, it's possible to read Rumi in translation. That's a fun, nice, well-written poem, but that is fully authentic to the tradition as much as we can be. So that was kind of the goal behind it. And it's open for pre-order now. It's coming just in time, a few days before Persian New Year. So it'll be out in March 17th. You can just look up The Flame of Love and look up my name, like The Flame of Love, Rumi Mojaradi. It'll come up and you can pre-order it. It's a paperback. It's quite affordable, I think. And it'll make a nice Nowruz gift to any Persian you know.
That's incredible. I'm very excited to get my hands on a copy come St. Patty's Day 2025. Have you written any poetry of your own in any language?
I have, and I've written in Persian and in English, and very few lines in Arabic. I tried, but I'm not fluent enough to really go at it. But I've written in Persian and English, and I've published a few of my English poems on my own platforms. I wrote one, my only one that I really liked was called A Lament for South Asian Persian, and it's on my page, and it's also on YouTube. I really should make it a video if it's only a reel, so that you could search it and find it. But basically, I wrote a ghazal, which is the most popular genre of Persian poetry in South Asia, lamenting the decline and the lack of care for Persian in the subcontinent. So it's a bit hyperbolic, right? Persian is still a living tradition in India, but just lamenting what we had, which was a really kind of the center. At some point, India, at one point in the, especially the Mughal era, India was actually the capital of Persianate cultural production, not Iran or Afghanistan. So that's probably the only one I really liked, and I should try more. But I always feel like there's so much to translate and so much better. So when I scroll through Ganju and I find all these amazing lines of poetry, and no one's even read them in Persian in God knows how long, let alone translate them, I always think, I better translate this instead of sitting. Maybe one day I'll sit and write my own collection.
Now, that's inspiration for the rest of us to be able to benefit from the work that you do, making all of these great literary masterpieces accessible to us, right, in our own language. Any other thoughts, Muhammad Ali, before we sign off? Where can folks find you, your work? Where can they follow what you're doing?
Sure, yeah. So if you go to Persian Poetics, persianpoetics.com, that's my website where basically everything, all the courses happen. And you can just follow my work on Instagram, Twitter, you can find me and you can follow what I do. And there's my book as well that I've mentioned. So if you want to learn Persian or read in translation or improve your Persian, all of the above is accessible. I also live in New York, so I have classes. We have events in New York, and there's a class in New York starting very soon in person. So if you're in the city, we can definitely meet and talk more and even strategize about business ideas that dear Farhan has put me onto with online learning and whatnot. If you're listening to this thinking, oh, is this something I want to do? I would say yes, definitely do it, because one of my main anxieties in life was I don't want to be stuck in one place because I have family all over and friends all over. And I don't want to do a job that I hate or even a job that I just tolerate. I want to do a job that I like, that's flexible, that allows me to move around and feel like I'm doing something that I at least enjoy. If you can do that for yourself, I think it's worth trying for, to have a job where you can create content and teach people and have a community and move around, live somewhere that's fun and cheaper than where you live. I would recommend anyone listening to pursue this type of model, especially looking in the future where everything is going online and remote and digital.
Awesome words to end on, Muhammad Ali. Thank you so much for your time today and for your friendship. There's so much we can, continue to talk more about. And this was a fantastic session. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.